Right, good afternoon. My name is Allan Rwakakooko. I'm currently the head of legal services at Umeme, which is an electricity distribution company in Uganda, the largest electricity distribution company, which is running a concession to run the distribution network in Uganda. So I also recently retired as the um, chairman in-house council committee of Uganda Law Society. So I'm an advocate of the High Court. And yeah, it's very nice that you've invited me here. Thank you very much, Cynthia. This sector in Uganda, we've seen a lot of private capital flow in, and quite a bit of it has been invested in the generation space. So right now we have the Karuma Dam, which is 600 megawatts, which is almost completed. It's just getting to the commissioning stage. We had an Isimba power plant, about 138 megawatts. Now in Uganda, that basically almost doubles. No, it actually almost triples the capacity that we have. And with a growing economy, we have demand growing at about 10% per year for electricity. And in that, you know that if you have a lead time of 5 years, 5 to 6, 7 years for a plant, this is actually going to help us have some extra reserves, which helps with export. But it's an indicator of growth of our country based on the amount of increasing demand for electricity. So we have a lot in terms of generation. That usually means that we also have a lot in infrastructure like transmission lines, substations. I know Umeme alone has attracted about 700 million in the last decade or so, 2 decades, sorry, of private capital. So we expect that with this growth, we'll have not just an opportunity, but we'll have actually tangible results from the last 20 years. Of course, my bias is in energy, so I'll always pick 2 projects like that. We also have a lot of road construction going on. We have the expressway, which has made what used to be a 3-hour drive to the airport, 45 minutes without any real traffic issues. That has made it very efficient for people to move from one area of the country to the other. We see a lot of infrastructure growth in terms of construction, public roads, power projects. It's a sign of growth, and the government has been spending more in doing that. And I believe that it's one of the things that makes our economy, that's supposed to stimulate the economy. So I think there's a success story in Uganda on that. Manager will probably focus on 3 aspects: quality, cost, and time. And really, these are the 3 things that every project seems to if they don't get it right, then there's always a problem. When we have projects that are coming up, first of all, we rely heavily on funding that may not be assured, because our budget will not fund 100% of our development projects. So sometimes we'll get funding from donors, sometimes we'll get funding from some grant funding. Maybe one of the other projects we're looking at is we have a crude oil pipeline. Uganda finally discovered oil, and that probably should have been the first thing I talked about because it's everywhere in the news. But we recently had an issue with the European Parliament where they don't want that pipeline to be built. So of course there is the issue of the environmental issues taken into consideration, but with many people who actually can influence the funders coming up and saying we don't want the pipeline built. And Uganda has been looking at that pipeline and the oil that is going to be transported as a good way to get ourselves to grow. So the first challenge we have is because we're heavily reliant on external funding, our projects can start and stop based on what a person outside Uganda can decide. I know recently there was a lawsuit filed in the French court to stop Total from investing, and it was thrown out yesterday. But that's an indicator that you will always have quite a number of objections that may come in to create some strategic risk around these projects. I think while they might not stop the projects, they will at least delay them. And we've had quite a number of delays and projects that have failed because of that. The second issue is whenever we're planning for a project, we have many people who are affected by that project. And I'll give you an example of, say, a road or a power line being built, or anything which may require people to be relocated or compensated in some way. That, because of our land tenure system, we often have a challenge regarding agreements with regard to valuation of compensation. Our constitution doesn't allow compulsory acquisition of land, save for very specific incidents, and developing infrastructure is not one of them. So you have to convince the teams, you have to have their interests taken into consideration, which is a good thing. But the process usually takes longer than it should. So you'll always have a project delayed by a year or two because you're working on project, you're discussing with project affected people. And if one person does not agree, you often have a challenge with the rest. So that's the second one. I think the third one usually deals with the quality of the materials procured. Sometimes because you're getting funding from one part of the world, you might not get the best equipment, but because of the funding, you have to take what they give you. And we don't manufacture this equipment ourselves. So sometimes you will pick cost over quality, and that might not be beneficial in the long run. And then we've had some incidents where there have been challenges with regard to the quality of work in a major project, and that has not only been a problem for the project, people developing the project, but we know the users always have a worry that the money they have used to build the project, to build the infrastructure, will have to be paid back, and the infrastructure will not be serving the purpose. So yes, sometimes the quality isn't very good because you might actually find that you're scaling back or building something that's lower in standard than what is expected, and then the costs go up, and then there are delays in implementing these projects. I think we have. I work for Umeme, and Umeme is a classic case of a company that came in to run a concession with the view of bringing private capital to apply to public infrastructure. So I think they play a very big role, because when you have the government running some of these projects, which are supposed to be basically that they should cover their own costs, you sometimes have some problems with regard to resource limited settings, or the need to take into consideration not strictly economic, make decisions that are not strictly economic, because the government, of course, has stakeholders they have to take care of. So when you bring the private sector in, firstly, they will not strain the government by having taxpayers cover everything. They could bring in private capital, but they also deal with management, and they have a balance sheet that can attract more capital. If you look at Uganda's energy sector, for instance, you will see that the privatization of Uganda Electricity Board, or the concession of the distribution network to Umeme, has resulted in attracting capital that the balance sheet of the government-owned company would never have been able to attract. So you will have private funds coming in, knowing that the management is private, and you won't have the government expropriating the assets, or you won't have an issue with collection because this is a private sector entity. And that way, the concession and public-private partnerships have actually been given lenders and given investors confidence in that. So I think the answer to your question is private sector is not just good to have, but I think it is very necessary for public infrastructure, not just in the ability to attract capital, but also in the ability to use that capital to meet the targets of the government. I think Africa right now, with a growing population, growing urbanization, growth in terms of our economy, in terms of the resources we have, the people in the country, I think it's one of the best investment destinations. Each and every country in Africa. I'll speak for Uganda as well. Um, at this right now, of course, they consider it risky, so the return on investment is much higher than you would if you were dealing with something in Europe. So right now, many investors are looking at Africa as the ideal investment destination because it used to be risky, but now there is the right kind of assurance. Our markets have grown. There's good governance going on. Of course, we have a lot of minerals and we've got training and people have grown. So you definitely not have to import all your personnel. So I believe kind of assurance should come in terms of the government adopting a lot of private sector approaches. So while you will have a very complicated, protracted accountability process for public funds through procurement laws and procurement procedures and having a public procurement authority overseeing everything, I think we need to have greater planning and a more efficient way of procuring, especially if you're using public funds, that will allow the project to meet those three tests in terms of quality and cost and time. And I think we should have the right kind of people overseeing the expenditure. So I sometimes worry about our politicians overseeing them, even though it's necessary. But I think the public service in Uganda or the offices that oversee the procurement process should be properly staffed, properly resourced, and they should look at it from a kind of private sector mentality, where you have to take into account time, value, and then the return. So I think the government should run procurement like a business, and they should look at the ultimate goal, which is efficiency. I'm still not sure that our procurement process is as efficient as it should be. It's gotten better. So I believe that we have the perfect opportunities right now, but we need to create some kind of efficiency and a way of accountability that is more private sector, which has a more private sector focus. I think we should also do a lot more public-private partnerships, which attract funding, which attract financing from the private space, because I don't think our taxes should be used for all that. And then the government should also learn and match what we do with these success stories that we've had. So I think we've had some good projects, and I think the mix of public and private management and administration has been very helpful.
Hello, my name is Pheona and I am immediate past president Uganda Law Society, but I am also former in-house counsel for National Water and Sewerage Corporation. So far we've had about 2 successful ones that I can think about. This has been the airport contract with the Chinese funder and contractor, and then the Umeme contract. So in Uganda, we have not had very many successful cases of public-private partnerships and that kind of funding for huge infrastructure projects, mostly because a few years ago the government stopped giving sovereign guarantees, and that is usually a requirement. So I would find that is one of the challenges that is coming into the issue of this kind of funding. Now with other public-private partnerships, sometimes when government is supposed to give counterpart funding or some kind of assurance, a sovereign guarantee, this is not usually available. And for developing countries, this is a common problem. The second problem is also the structuring of these kinds of financing. And the third problem that I think has guided successful private partnership, private funding, at least for National Water and Sewerage Corporation, we've had some projects that have been a result of PPPs, and we're glad for that, especially private funding, not partnership, but funding. These successes have come from the issue of National Water and Sewerage Corporation, for instance, as a parastatal, having its own AAA rating from the World Bank. So sometimes our parastatals don't have a very good credit rating, and that also impedes their ability to access financing for huge infrastructure projects. For running energy. Now, these have been, to me, I think, quite successful. And one of the things that happened is, I think, government, getting involved and being willing to put in their skin in the game. Otherwise, I think that private funding is very important because I think it is tied to a lot of conditions and compliance might be higher. However, there is a danger because sometimes the interests are higher, the interest rates are higher, the stakes are higher.